All right. So, welcome listeners back to the 180 podcast. I'm your host, Paul, and I'm with my co host here, Nick.
Hey everyone, it's me again.
So, just a reminder about what our show is about. It's kind of stories from everyday people for young people to learn and hopefully be inspired by to do something with more intention. So, on today's show, we're talking about corporate careers and what type of things to look out for when you're carving your own path. What are the challenges, what opportunities that will come about both personally and professionally? So, our guest today has had lots of experience navigating this tricky road, and I'm going to let Nick introduce who we have on our show today.
Yo, thank you, Scar Paul, for the passing. So today we'll be welcoming Scar Abby Ma. So I guess the two of us best knew her as the alumni of our group, but she also served as a Beaver leader for several years as well. I guess one of her biggest roles with Scouts Canada is being on the board of governors as the vice chair of finance, right? A more professional career path, she graduated from UBC Southern School of Business and holds both CPA and CFA designation. She also experienced a lot of leadership roles at KPMG and BC Lotto Corporations. And currently, she is a vice president of private equity real estate firm. Another thing to note is that she is a winner of the 2019 Peak Rising Star Award, which is hosted by the Association of Women in Finance. And from what I heard, I guess the most awesome job that she's currently held is being an awesome mother of an almost 2-year-old baby boy. So everyone, please help us welcome Scar Appy.
Yay!
Thank you, Nick, for that very flattering introduction.
Did I
Oh,
miss something there? Or, do you want to add something on?
No, I think you've got it covered. I actually forgot about a couple of those things along the way.
So anyway, we want to dive into the conversation and get old nuggets from you. So Appy, I saw that you hold a lot of different awesome positions and achievements, right? When you first came out of school, did you think this is where you're going to be 5 years down in the future?
No, absolutely not. I think one of the things that I've learned very clearly throughout my entire career, an entire academic career as well, actually, is that you can't always plan for everything. And actually, I should revise that comment to say you can never plan for everything, actually. Um, in the sense that when I was in school, I had this whole plan set aside. I was going to graduate within X years. I was going to go through co-op program. I was going to go on exchange. I was going to do a law school background and get a degree and do political sciences. And, there were all sorts of things there that I planned. And some of it happened, and some of it didn't. And, not necessarily because I was not successful in doing it. And sometimes that was the reason, but just mainly because life happens. And, sometimes your path takes you down a different road. And part of being successful, in my opinion, is being able to navigate those roads and taking attention to the doors that might open along the way.
Mm, interesting. That's good to know because I'm someone who's about to graduate too, and I have these kind of imagination expectations of who I should be, where I should be in the next 5-10 years. But I guess not knowing everything is also a fun part of life, I guess. But
Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely.
now that you
I think
mentioned, oh,
there's
sorry, go
sorry,
ahead.
Nick, I should say that I do believe it's good to have an idea of where you want to be. One of the most common interview questions out there is, where do you see yourselves in 5 years or 10 years? And so, I'm not advocating to say that you should just kind of let the winds take you where you want to go, but to be able to have that flexibility and adaptability to keep eyes open to different opportunities that come up, I think has been really beneficial to me in life.
Mm. Scapo, you about to say something?
I was going to say, so when you graduated right out of the box, if someone asked you that 5 year question, what would you have said back then to that question coming out of school?
I think I would have said that you would see me in a corporate law environment, my plan when I graduated was to spend a couple of years getting my chartered accountant designation, my CA. It's known as a CPA CA now. And I was going to go back to law school. And I was going to do a couple of years there and get my corporate law degree and, maybe do M&A law or something along those lines.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, that obviously didn't happen.
But all the awesome things happen, right?
Yeah, for sure. And that's kind of what I mean. I mean, if I think back to my university career, I mean, I didn't even want to be in accounting. I initially wanted to do portfolio investing. And, I ended up getting my CFA anyway. So, life works in interesting ways, and where you kind of get to depends a little bit on where you want to put yourself. But that was, the impetus. I didn't even want to be in accounting.
And there you go.
Yeah.
I'm very glad I did for all the accountants out there.
Yeah. You mentioned about, changing roles, open new doors and everything. And, from professionally stalking your LinkedIn account, I also noticed that you have worked at a few different, organizations and positions. So, what are some things that make you make those different career moves that you make, in your past?
So going a little bit back to when I first graduated, I decided to get my CA. And in order to do that, you have to go through, back in the day anyways, you had to go through an audit firm in order to get a certain number of hours to qualify for the designation. And so a little bit of that path was pretty much laid out for you right when you graduate, just in terms of being able to attain a designation and the requirements in order to do that. And moving through to different avenues, I think for myself in particular, KPMG, which was the employer I spent quite a number of years at, they had a very good program where they essentially allowed employees to take a look at different areas of the business, whether it was an audit, tax, or advisory. And so, I think that really helped as well, having a very supportive employer who has the opportunities in a number of different areas that aren't necessarily exactly your background. And so being able to take advantage of that, I transitioned over into our advisory practice. I think there are a couple of different decisions that each individual person makes for themselves throughout their lives. And, for me, leaving KPMG was a little bit of, a turning point where I had decided that I wasn't sure if I wanted to stay to be a partner at KPMG. And that was kind of driving force to leaving KPMG and exploring industry in a different role. And then again, following that, like when I left BCLC, I was actually on maternity leave, having just had my son, and wasn't necessarily looking to leave, but an opportunity came up, and that's kind of my comment about paying attention to doors that could possibly be open, and considering what those opportunities hold, and ended up deciding to move into private equity, which is a very markedly different role than each of the previous two roles that I've been in.
So I always wonder, like, how much is it the job itself, or is it the challenge, or like what kind of things do your thought process when maybe an opportunity comes up? How do you know this is the right one? Is it often like, how's your thought process? I want to speak on what it could be, but
yeah, no, for sure. And I mean, I don't actually know if there's ever a right answer to that, which I'm sure, both of you have experienced throughout as well, where if something comes up and you have the choice to take one option versus another, even when you think about something as simple as deciding what to get takeout for, right? There's no right answer per se, because both options might be delicious food, and maybe one takes longer to get here than the other. But for me in particular, the things that I look for is primarily challenge. So where do I think I can continue to learn and grow? I'll kind of reference Scouter Paul, you're familiar with one of our previous scouting advisors, Scouter John, who always said, if you're not growing, you're dying.
You're
right?
dying, yeah, of
And
course.
so it sounds a little morbid, Nick, but
No. Okay. I'll quote to this. It's
yeah.
fascinating.
The impetus behind it is the idea that if you're not continuing to better yourself, you're essentially falling behind, right? And I think that goes for anything that we do, right? And if you kind of decide to just stop learning and stop bettering yourself, then everybody else is moving forward and bettering themselves, and you're kind of falling behind in that journey. So, in that respect, I always look primarily for challenge, and I look for who I'm going to be working with and can I learn from them.
How do you think that's differed from like your 20s versus your 30s? Because for me, it's strange, because I thought when I was younger that I wanted more different challenges and learn a lot, right? Like you want to get that experience, but at the same time, like with your accounting degree, it's good to have some foundational skills because that carries over, for a long term. I kind of find myself now in an interesting spot because I think we're both. I mean, you have a son, so maybe it's a bit different than me. We're still empty nesters, I guess, or no one ever actually came to the nest yet. So I'm actually looking at a lot of different, like, really random challenges as well, because I feel like this is the opportunity, because I don't have a dependent yet, but you do have one now. Has that changed your approach, or do you think it's actually been for the best, maybe because you're more certain of things?
There's I think 2020 has been an incredible year to reflect on this, but I've always been eternally grateful for the position that I've been in, where I don't need to worry about that. And I recognize that I'm in quite a privileged position that not everybody has. And so, you're absolutely right. There are people in circumstances where they can't take the risk. They can't necessarily take on different challenges where they risk loss of income or whatnot. So I've always been fortunate to be in a position where I could do that. That being said, I mean, you know my career, and Nick, from your stalking, you can tell that I haven't done anything. I'll call it, way out there.
Yeah, nothing about a startup yet. Nothing about buying a farm and growing your own vegetables and.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
That might happen. It can still happen,
Yeah, who knows?
So I do have something else to touch on, and I did mention about my last email. I'm not sure if you remember. We had this chat before a while back when you were at BCLC about kind of being a very young director there, but also female, also minority, and being in public service myself. Understand that the environment, it's not exactly as progressive, maybe in terms of just the people, because so many people stay there for such a long time, and it's definitely demographically different than, say, if you were in a tech startup where maybe people haven't even grown facial hair yet in those areas. So I wanted to ask, kind of maybe revisit that question, like what kind of challenges have you faced as a person of color or a minority and a female and younger than maybe some of your more senior leadership peers? How has the challenge been there? Maybe what are the opportunities that you've seen in your path to these more senior leadership positions?
Yeah. So thanks for asking that question, Scouter Paul. And I think it's really important, particularly in this day and age and all the conversations that have been occurring now. I'll just to give a little bit of background for the listeners. So in terms of age, that I think most of the people listening would be younger than me anyways. But when I first started at BCLC, I was the youngest director, and the different levels at BCLC were that you had directors, vice presidents, ultimately all reporting up to the CEO. So I'll call it like that was part of the senior management team. At the time that I was promoted to director, I was 29. So, fairly young, I think I would consider that. I don't know this for a fact, but I would go out on a limb to say that I was the youngest director on the senior executive team at the time, if not, one of two younger directors. Looking around the table at that director team, I was one of two persons of color, and certainly the only Asian person on the team. And, absolutely, I think there is a little bit more, there's definitely a little bit more challenge. I wouldn't say in terms of color, to be honest, because BCLC in particular, despite being the only, one of the only people of color on the executive management team at the time, I didn't feel like there was any sort of discrimination or, negative result as, due to my ethnicity. I certainly didn't feel that at all. And I think that's one of the great things about my experience there, is that I didn't have that. Not everybody has that experience. I will say, though, that my age may have played a factor. And certainly when I started that role, there was a little bit of, challenge in terms of, what do you bring to the table, having only had 29 years of life experience.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Right, versus some other people at the table who working for 30 plus years. And there's certainly a factor in that, for sure.
Yeah.
And I think part of the thing that I always tried to remember for myself was that, there's two sides to every coin, and absolutely, like, there's no discounting the experience that that time brings you. And those individuals who have gone through it all, seen it all, there's value to be taken from their war stories, so to say. But, always remembering that there's additional value that you can bring in terms of a fresh perspective is good. One of the very vivid memories I have actually is when I had people in, the staff level actually come up to me one day, and they were like, wow, Abby, I'm really glad to see a person of color in the senior management team, because this has been, one of the few times, if not the first time, we've ever seen that. Wow. And it actually was, a very memorable moment for me, because at that point I hadn't realized what type of responsibility I have in that respect. Being a leader, being somebody of person and female, and the responsibility I have to all of the other people who are growing up and looking to grow their career. That is an opportunity. So not sure if that totally answers your question, but I think that there's different challenges. I've been fortunate not to have been the target of any sort of discrimination or whatnot as a result, but there's a lot of things to always consider that is not necessarily always top of mind.
Yeah, I think in Vancouver, being a much more diverse, or in BC actually, right, like more diverse population, I think it definitely you don't feel and see it as often. Even in my career, what I did note was, I think when I was younger, I would think that it's always a linear progression from like a junior analyst to the CEO, or maybe to a senior manager. But what I reflect on working at Fraser Health is just meeting a lot of folks who are very content to just be where they are, until the last day of work. So a lot of analysts, a lot of friends of mine, I consider friends at work, they're like 62 years old, 63 years old. They're same level, but they've got 10, 20 more years experience at that same role. And they're just happy to kind of do their job and, do the best work, because they all have all the experience, right? And you always lean on them. Even if you are a more senior position, you have to understand how to navigate, someone who's more senior in age, but maybe not in position to balance that out. And you were telling me before about just kind of managing peers. Maybe you can speak a little bit on managing your or managing your team with people with higher age, higher experience than you did. How did you navigate that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, especially at BCLC, there are a number of people who are, very, very happy doing what they're doing, and the interest and motivation to move up into senior management roles is not something that's right for everybody. A number of the people on my team, the majority of the people on my team at BCLC were, of greater age than I was. And managing some of them was more of a challenge than others. And I think part of that depends on the dynamic between the team and understanding exactly what they're looking for. You know, as an example, there were people on the team who were, you know, happy where they were and trying to continue to grow, and actually viewed having somebody who was younger than them in a leadership role as motivation to say that, you know, they could get there too. But, you know, absolutely, there were other people on the team who just couldn't come to terms with having somebody younger than them. And, you know, despite working with that individual and having the conversations and trying to align interests, like at the end of the day, it didn't work out, and they decided to take another path. So I think, you know, for young people in management roles, there's always going to be that, you know, those two paths, right? Like one, whether it does work out, and sometimes it doesn't, and that's not necessarily, you know, that shouldn't be viewed as a failure for that leader, because each person has to make their own independent assessment. What ended up working for me, you know, at least in my experience, has been having that very honest conversation with them, with each individual, and seeing how, you know, where they want to get to. And I've always viewed my role as a leader more as, you know, perhaps a servant leader, if I can use that term, to be able to help people to get to where they want to go. You know, when people said like, oh yeah, you know, this is my boss, I was like, well, actually, you know, I answer to you guys.
Yeah, of course.
Right. They're the ones kind of helping hold up the team, and without them, I wouldn't be anything. And so that's always been my view.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting though, Paul, as you bring that up, is that, you know, one of the unfortunate things that I've always felt has happened through a lot of organizations is that people tend to view positions as, you know, more senior or more knowledgeable. And one of the most important positions, in my opinion, in an entire organization is, you know, an executive assistant or an admin assistant.
Yeah.
And a lot of people, you know, often will look down upon that position, saying like, oh, you know, they're just doing like
admin work,
paper
pushing,
copy something.
Yeah, something. But you know, like the mutual respect for everybody in the organization who plays a role, like without those individuals, an organization would not run.
Yeah, and they're often the people that have been maybe around the longest, and they actually they know the most people. So if I ever get a Christmas present for anyone, it's going to be the EAs.
Yeah, that's right.
Because they are the gatekeepers for a lot of the senior executives as well, or so maybe some of the HR functions as well, right? Like timekeeping, recording. So our reception person, she reminded me that, because I was giving my time off schedule, right, for my wedding, and she reminded me that we have a policy where you get up to 5 days if you're getting married that year, fully paid. I didn't know that, and if we didn't have a relationship, maybe a bad one, she maybe wouldn't feel like it's necessary for her to remind me that was the case, and just say, what do you want? Vacation? Okay, done. But she went out of her way, and I think got her a gift card or something, and she was like, I'm just doing my job. I'm like, well, yes, but you know, she could have just wrote it down as I said it, instead of reminding me that I could actually get 5 days paid, which is great. So I can carry that off to next year. Yeah.
Absolutely. And Paul, you know, like in that respect too, like that's another very, very important thing that I think people know about, but maybe don't place the emphasis on, and that's relationships, right? Like knowing, like having relationships, knowing who to talk to, and having that go both ways and helping other people. Like I would not have gotten the job that I have today if not for relationships.
There you go.
Yeah, I think I just know how to, you know, survive in the working environment. Go after seniors and make good relationships with them, and they will help you because they know most of the stuff. And I guess 5-day, you know, pay vacation thing for marriage is a good thing that I will have in my mind as well.
Not all companies. Some people have stock options. I don't get those, obviously. I don't get any more. Abby, so it depends where you work, Nick, right?
Actually 5 days paid for a wedding. I haven't heard of that benefit before, but that sounds pretty good.
Yeah, it's almost like a marriage leave, like a marriage leave or wedding leave or something.
Right. Because it's so stressful.
Yeah, yeah. I guess the last thing on this point about diversity, do you feel more responsible now to kind of move that narrative forward a little bit?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
Because something I had to ask in a course I did on leadership was asking as a senior leader, like, has this idea of diversity inclusion and has it changed your hiring practice, right? Like like, because now people are maybe skewing more depending on your organizational's culture and maybe heat from the public in certain
Yeah.
cases to hire a more diverse candidate, or just hire the best person and then whoever shows up, that's who you hire. Like, how do you balance that out? How did you balance that out
Yeah,
as a hiring manager?
we definitely made sure it was part of our hiring practices at BCLC, and that was and I reference back to that because that was my most recent experience in large hiring. Our team was 25 people across 2 offices, so there were lots of opportunities with people moving either to different opportunities or to different areas in the organization to get new hires. And that was a very conscious part. Our first and foremost objective was always to hire the right person for the role, even if that meant it took longer. So if we had to wait because the candidate pool just was not meeting our expectations, that was okay. But with, the secondary objective was always to make sure that we were taking into account our own subconscious biases potentially, to make sure that we were putting that in check. And a couple of the things that we did in order to do that was to make sure that potential candidates met as many people as possible.
Okay.
And so, for us, even if it was a person that, we were hiring as a manager, we always had that person meet at least 5 people within the team, so that there would be, an opportunity for each of those 5 people to meet them and interact with them. And it obviously does not make it foolproof, but it reduces the chances for different subconscious biases to appear, because on debrief and feedback, we would provide different perspectives.
That's fascinating to hear, right? Because in my mind, it's just always, do how as much test as needed to determine who has the best skill set. That's it. Because I guess from my point of view, right, the ability to take care of the responsibilities and the positions in the organization is the most important thing, right? And I guess the second thing is mindset, attitude, and everything. So do whatever it takes to determine the one that has the best in those 2 categories, and that's it. So disregarding the whole thing about diversity and inclusiveness and everything, but I guess I was kind of wrong.
No, and you don't say that, Nick,
Yeah.
because I think there are different perspectives out there for sure. For me personally, I would actually flip those 2 things that you talked about. And to me, the most important thing is actually mindset, attitude, and aptitude for learning. And maybe that's because I view myself and my responsibility more as teaching and trying to make sure that whoever is the right person for the role is successful in that role. But I'll give an example. We actually ended up having to terminate someone in one of my previous positions where, technically speaking, like on the skill set, like they were very capable, very confident, and a lot of the things that they did were great, but the attitude just wasn't there, and it ended up rating on the team entirely, and that just was a higher cost than we were able to bear.
So add on to that, right? So if you were, to take part in the hiring process of a freshly graduate person, right? So are those the abilities that you would look into them? So first is mindset, attitude, and then abilities, and then also maybe cognitive bias and everything else later.
Yeah, and I think there are a number of things that new graduates can do to help themselves um, be portrayed in that light, right? And obviously, as new graduates, like you don't necessarily have all the very direct experience that you can show. Like, yes, I did exactly what you're hiring for, because, well, simply speaking, you probably haven't, right? But a lot of things like extracurriculars, the position, putting yourself in positions where you have examples of initiative and being a self-starter, like those are things that if I were to count as evaluating a skill set of a new graduate, like that's what I would look for. I wouldn't necessarily say, like if I was hiring for accounting, right? I wouldn't say, have you made a journal entry, right? Because that doesn't matter, but do you have examples where you've done something out of your own initiative, right? Like whether that is in a school club or, any sort of volunteer organization.
Speaking of volunteering for organizations, oh, by the way, thank you for the answer. Speaking for volunteer organization, I think Scalpo has prepared a question for that as well.
Yeah. Thanks for the lead in, Nick. Well, I just want to bring on one point from what Abby said with the group interviews, because I've been in a lot of group interviews and both on both sides. I think at the end of the day, if people want to work with someone they like, right? And I know an hour interview or half an hour meeting the person doesn't determine that, but first impressions and getting a sense of the person and your team getting a sense of the person, they have to like the person they're working with, even skills aside, and maybe skills are about the same, attitude is about the same, but sometimes it's personality, sometimes it's like maybe there's some specific tasks that your analysts know about, Abby, but you don't, so you want to make sure that they and maybe communicate what that task is, or that technical skill, and make sure that that person who's coming on board is able to translate that and move forward. So I definitely seen and been a part of more group interviews in the last couple of years than say maybe the previous decade where we worked, or more junior roles, because people want the entire team, the whole family, to know this new hire, because rehiring is expensive, right?
Yeah.
Firing and hiring is expensive.
Absolutely. Yeah, and it takes a toll on team morale as well, right? Having brought somebody in and deciding that they didn't work out, like that, the emotional cost of that is just as high, if not higher, than the monetary cost.
Yeah, for sure. You'll know about Nick. We're just foreshadowing for you too.
Yeah, I don't think I have been in a group interview before, but
really? Okay.
Yeah, it's always been a solo thing, right?
Right.
Most of them I failed, but I learned, or at least I try to improve.
That's the important part.
Yeah.
Practice. The more interviews you put yourself through, the better, right? There's lots of really good people who I know would do a great job at whatever they're applying for that didn't get the job, simply because they might not have shown up the right way that day.
Mm-hmm. So switching gears a bit, as Nick was alluding to, so I know you and your husband Brandon have always been great at giving your time and resources back to the community. So a little story. I remember at your wedding that you guys, instead of asking for gifts, you guys asked the guests to donate to one of three or all three causes that you were very passionate about, and I believe scouting in our group was one of them. So how important has giving back and volunteering been for your career and maybe for you personally?
Yeah, absolutely. It's been very a very crucial part of our lives, and I'm sad to say that over the last couple of years I haven't been able to commit as much time to it as I would have liked. But one of the main things that I think about all the time, going back to our conversation of being a person of color and being female, is of the opportunities that I have simply because my parents made the move when I was little and gave me the opportunity to grow up in BC and in Canada. There's lots of people out there who don't have that opportunity, who haven't necessarily been set up that way, and being able to acknowledge kind of the benefits that we've had and to give back to the community to help others in that way is really important. There's also a lot of people who have devoted their time and effort and their entire lives to these sort of greater causes, and being able to support them, whether through our own time or through financial donations, is something that we want to try to do, especially now that we have a kid. It certainly throws things in a different light to say, what kind of world do I want Evan to grow up in, and what do I want him to learn from us and from others in terms of being just a really good human being, and trying to help the world a little bit. It's incredible, actually, to think about where we're seeing more people at in their own individual opinions, and what actions to do that. So certainly, sorry to go off on a little bit of a tangent there, but I think certainly it's been very incremental to our careers, but also just part of who we are in our desire to give back, right? Like as parents, as members of community, as sons and daughters as well, right? And friends. It ends up being more so a responsibility, I think, of people in positions that I consider myself to be in, the benefit that I have to be able to give back.
Then follow that, Nick.
I was so into the story. I really like the fact that as you taking on the role as being a mother and everything, you were thinking of the world that your child's gonna grow up in, the world in the future and everything, in the way how giving back to community can help shape that world into a more positive one. And that's something that it makes me really resonate with, because I'm young and right now I'm kind of powerless in a sense that I don't have that ability to make significant impact on the world that I want to live in, the world that ideally I want to live in yet. But it did give me inspiration, to just take small steps forward, and it will happen. So thank you for that, inspiration and everything.
Yeah, and Nick, just picking up on something you're saying there, like, don't ever feel like you're powerless to do anything. I mean, frankly, in this world, like each individual person, whatever action they take, even if it's something as small as like literally putting a recycling item in the right box,
Recycle,
that's power right there, because you have the power to make that choice, and you're taking that step to act out what you believe in. I think if it's one thing that a lot of people, and myself included, are guilty of, is being a little bit too humble, and putting yourself in the mind of not having enough confidence, right? And believe in yourself, right? To know what you can do, and part of that confidence includes knowing what you need to improve on, right? And that's where humility comes into it. But I put myself into that category where, I mean, even now, some of the things that I do based on where I am, people look at me and they're like, wow, Abby, like you've done a lot and you're really successful. But even I said to Brandon, when Scatter Paul reached out to me and said, hey, are you interested in talking about your experiences? I said to Brandon, I was like, people want to hear about my experience. Like what have I done that people want to hear about? And that right there is also like, I'm still in that same boat of confidence and feeling like I don't necessarily have anything to add. But please don't feel that way, right? Like don't feel like powerless to do anything.
Yeah, so I mean, the two things come to mind actually when you say that is like, the power of like social media. Yes, you can tell, you can see people transform into this kind of mob right? In one hand, right? But on the bright side, if we look at the brighter sides, like even, in our group we share things like, meatless Mondays, right? So I think I'm 100% confident to say that I didn't eat meat on one Monday because of this campaign that we did, right, and that was something very small, right, that the group decided to do. And you know what, okay, I'll eat just tofu today, right? Like, it's not a big thing in the grand scheme of things if you look at all the roast I've ate, or like chicken wings I've had, but it can move the needle, right? It can change that narrative. And Nick, you have lots of time to do that, and technology and capability, right? Abby, like, we didn't grow up with Facebook or anything like that, right? We had Windows 95.
Yeah,
Okay.
I had dial-up internet.
Yeah, we had dial-up internet. I don't know what high speed. So I think even the little things make a difference. And even this podcast, if it's just you, me, and like Abby, like you and I talking to Nick about something, and he makes a change in his life, maybe we've helped the next CEO of Scouts Canada with something. I don't know.
I don't know. Sounds really far away.
It's a lot closer to think. You just, I would also say, live your life and appreciate the time that you have as a 20-year-old. Abby and I can both agree on that.
Yeah, time certainly passes by a lot
Yeah.
faster than you might think at that age.
So yeah, moving on to our next set of questions here. Now I know you also served on a board for Arts
Art starts. Yeah.
Art Starts.
Mhm.
Do you still do that right now, or
I
still-
don't know. I ended up pausing that one kind of when I did it simultaneously with Scouts and all the flying associated with that kind of
That
stuff.
was pre-Evan, right? So
That was pre-Evan, you're
Yeah.
right.
So I think we know and talked to a lot of volunteers, but not as many who've served on boards. So I was curious if you could maybe talk to our audience about the differences between being a frontline volunteer, which you've done, and serving on a board for Art Starts and Scouts Canada, of course.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there is perhaps an idea out there that being a frontline volunteer is quite a bit different than being a board volunteer. And, certainly while that's the case in a lot of the responsibilities, like I'm not necessarily doling out at a soup kitchen if I'm a board volunteer. And let me pause on that. I shouldn't say that because I actually think it's very important for people who are on boards to experience that frontline volunteering. But it's actually very similar to me because you're just serving the organization in a different way.
Mm-hmm.
And that organization needs all of those aspects. Definitely by being part of a board, there is more responsibility there because you're helping to steer the vision, the mission, and the programming of that organization. Especially in organizations like Art Starts in Schools, which goes to help integrate arts into education and promote the importance of arts and in schools and in different types of learning. But also at Scouts Canada, where bringing forward the mission and vision of that organization to serve all the youth across Canada. It's very, very important. It's different because there are, as there is with any sort of organization, there's always politics at different levels. These are people that you may not necessarily, completely agree with all the time, and that's very healthy because there needs to be a certain level of debate at these organizations, at every organization, in order to make sure that you're getting to the right answer. Not too different than what happens at like 180th, for example, right? Like when you guys are coming up with even the idea for this podcast, for example, I'm sure there was a little bit of debate on what the right medium was, what the right topics were. So there's lots of those type of conversations. No,
you guys I mean
completely
a lot
aligned all the time.
a lot too much.
Yeah. So I think there's differences, but it to me goes back to the attitude and kind of the purpose of why you're serving. And the purpose of why you're serving should be, in my mind, the same whether you're on the board or, for front lines working with kids.
Okay.
There's different skill sets for sure, right? And, I wouldn't necessarily be able to be the vice chair of finance of Scouts Canada back when I was if I didn't have a finance degree, for example, or that experience. So definitely different skill sets. And that also kind of talks to being able to move your experience and your knowledge from different environments.
So maybe pivoting a little bit, but kind of in the same thread. Like if you were going into a more corporate career, do you think the board experience kind of maybe gave you a bit more credibility in your executive roles? Because they are in the same space, let's say. The board and the executive team.
Yeah, for sure. I think so. So for the youth who are looking to get into different roles, right? Like even if you look at different organizations that have board positions open, I think that's always amazing experience to get. It gives you a little bit more understanding into how an organization runs and what are the type of things that are important in that guidance and leadership of that organization. So certainly, I believe it helped me get to where I was, even just in terms of the learning.
Yeah, did you get approached by both those organizations, or did Brandon approach you for one of them, or how did those board opportunities come about for you?
One of them, so our Starts in Schools, I actually just searched like I can't remember what year it was, but I decided as part of my learning for that year that I wanted to get a board position. And for the reasons that I kind of talked about, I believe that it would help further my learning. I thought it would be good for me to learn about different organizations and applying management skills. And so I literally just
searched.
I searched and I found it. I thought, it was a really, it was a really cool organization that kind of spoke to me because I quite like the arts as well. And I used to attempt to paint and draw. I'm not very good at it, hence why I'm still in finance, but that it spoke to me in that way. Scouts Canada, the board position, I'm trying to remember now. It might have been Scouter John that talked to me about it because he was on the board at the time and they were looking for a vice chair of finance.
Okay.
I think that might have been how it came about. And again, there's the power of relationships, right? Like, would they necessarily have considered me because I'm some young person out of the West, right? But having
Eastern or Western biases with Scouts Canada, because a lot of people actually, the membership is actually largely in Ontario.
Yeah.
So even having a representation out west, and there's another kind of a challenge.
No, for sure. Right? Well, the good thing about Scouts Canada and the board makeup is that there's a requirement to have board members represented from each area, so that we make sure that there's that we're hearing the perspectives of everybody.
Yeah, so they got to use a chip on you. So, and I remember some of those. I mean, and because I do remember watching one of the AGMs, and I remember you presenting there, and it was really cool to see. I think your counterpart, who was the staff, was a bit taller than you, so it was kind of like this contrast, right? And also the makeup of Scouts Canada. Not going back to, don't want to go back to the diversity bit, but most of the members are, in Vancouver are maybe from Asian backgrounds, but the rest of Canada isn't, right? And so there's another challenge there, which you again broke more barriers for us. So thank you.
Well, and that's actually interesting because as you mentioned that, you're right. Like I think back to my experience on the board, and I was the only person of color.
Interesting.
Because I think what I'd have to go back to clarify. And there, people have different backgrounds that I'm not 100% aware of, right? But definitely one of the only visible.
Yeah, visible minority. Yeah. And again, the age thing too, Scout kind of right, like a lot more older group, especially serving on such a position. So you have lots of experience. You should definitely write something up or put something together about these experiences. I encourage you to do so. Just like we encouraged Jeremy and Sophie, who we had on a couple of weeks ago, to capture their travels. You'd think that they would do that, right? As part of this kind of life-changing thing, but they're kind of like, we're too busy for it. It's hard enough just to get hot water. So, right?
So we're doing the job as well to help them.
Yeah. So we're kind of setting people off to do this. So maybe, for yourself, hearing about all these experiences and not remembering all the things you've done, put together something for yourself might be interesting.
Yeah.
Host your own podcast, and then you have to tell people all your stuff.
Right.
Anyway, Scott, I think it's time to ask the golden question.
Sure.
Yeah. So, Scott, Abby. So for every guest that came into this podcast, we always want them to ask the golden questions, which is, what advice would you give to your younger self? But actually, in your case, I would ask, if you could go back, to your 18, early 20s, just graduate, right? Would you have done anything different? Why and why not?
Would I have done anything differently? I think for sure there's lots of things I might look back on and thought, maybe I should have taken a different road. Like a very quick example of that was, I mentioned early on, one of the things that I may have considered was like an exchange when I was in university and, spending a term somewhere else. And at the time when I was speaking to my parents about it, my dad was very adamant. He's like, well, if you're going to go and do this, you should absolutely go to China. Like 100%, 110, 20, 30, 40, 50%, you should go to China.
Okay.
And, this was, I'm, quite a bit older now. So this was like, 8 to 10 years ago. Oh God, no longer than that. Anyways,
Moving on.
And he said to me, he goes, I definitely support you if you go to China, but if you go somewhere else, like, no, I'm not, that's just not beneficial. And I, at the time said, well, I just want to go party in Europe. Like, so, I don't, like, no, screw it. And I ended up staying here, actually doing different things. And that led to different opportunities because, that your choose your own adventure book always takes you down different roads. But looking back upon that, I should have gone to China. Right? Like, so anyways, what that kind of speaks to is, do I regret doing anything I've done? Sure. But I think, I don't necessarily think I would have done anything differently because that's kind of all the different little experiences that add up to where I am now. When I didn't go on exchange, I ended up deciding to try and graduate early. I decided to start working earlier, and then that kind of set me up for a different sort of experience because I got the opportunity to work on different jobs at KPMG that maybe I wouldn't have. So, it all kind of goes to a different path and builds upon different strengths to get to, where I am today. So I think in that sense, the golden question is, don't live in the past, right? Especially as young people, you're going to try a bunch of different things and not all of them are going to work out. And that's okay. That's part of living. That's part of learning. But, don't let that continue to hold you back, right? Don't let the what if continue to hold you back because it's not, what if I had done this? The question should be, what if I do this, right? So instead of looking at it in the past of what you could have done, look at what you could do. And, don't worry about titles per se. I think this would have shown up on my LinkedIn too, but when I left BCLC as a director to join a private equity firm, I joined as a senior associate. And so when you look at that sort of career path, you think like, okay, hold on a second. You went from a director in senior management and you decide to take a role as a senior associate. Like that seems like a little bit of a step backward. Well, lo and behold, in 4 months, I was promoted to vice president. Right. And so it, look beyond the surface level into what you think that opportunity will get for you and, try to dig deep into what it is that you want to do and trust that the actions you take will get you there eventually, even not even, but especially because it will not be a straight path.
Yeah, I really agree with that, like dwelling on the past thing or like dwelling of what you should have done because you can't do anything about it. And it's, I don't know if maybe, again, we're maybe in our 30s now, like the past seems like it's so quickly moving, right? Like into the way back in the past, right? Like if I think about, I should have done a different, say, bachelor's degree, which when I was younger in my 20s, even when I was thinking, maybe I shouldn't have done economics. Maybe I should have specialized, like you said, in political science or in English to do like a pre-law. But, it's already happened. And the quicker you move away from that and just say, what can I do with what I do have? You're going to get to another place that maybe it's more regrets, but maybe it's more learning.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that's, something that's interesting. We've never had the same advice from all 4 people we've interviewed. And I think that's quite good.
That's not to say that I don't still do that. I do still look back and be like, oh, I should have done this.
I think but I think like dwelling, learning from it, but like kind of dwelling, like, man, I should have, maybe I can make up for like,
Right.
Yeah.
I guess a bit of a side story for myself is it's kind of what happened to me. I try to make up for. So I had took an extra year of school because I transferred in my bachelor degree to perhaps get into commerce. So I was in economics, I was in arts. And then I spent a year trying to change grades or kind of move my courses around to get a BCom, and it cost me a year. And then I never finished getting into the full program with a major. So I just finished my economics degree. And then I think like 6 years later, I did that diploma in business to say, okay, I made up that, that business education that I always wanted. And through the job I had, I got into my MBA program. So kind of it came full circle. Like maybe, I dwelled on it for a while, but it still came back and pushed me to do an MBA. And if I had a BCom and I kind of left it at that, maybe I wouldn't have done MBA and maybe I wouldn't have gotten these opportunities that I have now. Right. So the fact that I didn't get a chance to do my BCom helped perpetuate me to getting a master's degree, which I'm very happy with. And I've had some great experiences with that I never thought I would have. But, so maybe instead of dwelling on that thing that happened to me when I was younger, I used it as fuel to push me to do and just to take a leap. Like I didn't have a second thought about it after I did my business diploma. And then like literally that month after I graduated from that diploma program, maybe part of it was like watching people with hoods at my graduation. Because if you have a hood, it means you've got a master's degree. If you don't, you just did a diploma. Okay, it's very academic snobbishness that happens. So like, man, I want a hood, right? And then this opportunity to take this program came up that same month that I graduated from this diploma, and I said, I'm just going to do it because maybe I just want that hood. I don't know, or maybe it's a lifelong thing I wanted to make right, and I did, and so even though I graduated at the time, I graduated 10 years ago from bachelor's degree before that happened, and I was a little bit above the average age for an MBA. I think I was like 33, and everyone's mostly like there's like 25-year-olds in my program, and there was also 45-year-olds, so it was quite interesting. Anyways, a bit of a tangent story, but Abby, I definitely think that's a great advice that you brought up.
No, thank you. And like that's the learning from different stories that people share. Like that, frankly, is worth more. Well, I shouldn't say more. Worth, quite a bit. Like it's just as much as textbook learning, if not. That's where I was going to say it's more than textbook learning. Definitely, learning is like important as well. Yeah,
I mean, any school or sort of even like your CFA. I remember you telling me that for your current job it wasn't like so critical to have, but it's life.
And yet where I am now, like I use it all the time, and I should have it. Yeah.
So maybe before we wrap up completely, maybe tell us a little bit about your current role, what you like about it, and what are some cool things happening in the private equity world.
Yeah. So I moved into a role here in private equity. We're a real estate private equity firm. As a vice president, I'm responsible for sourcing acquisitions and closing investments into our fund. So what we do there is we essentially take investors' capital and we try to make them a really good return based on the parameters that we set out in terms of our fund. Really cool things are happening. So what we do with our fund is we invest into the affordable housing industry
Okay, cool.
in the United States. And so, the kind of really cool thing happening there is being able to see the different effects that are happening as part of the politics in the US, frankly. And there are certain things that are challenging about that business, like our tenants' ability to pay rent as a result of being impacted by COVID, as example. So there's very real time impacts that I'm seeing, and probably you're seeing too, Paul, like in your role at Fraser Health, like that's actually directly correlated, and you're seeing exactly what the fallout is from all these health standards being issued and vaccines being rolled out and things like that. So the really cool thing I think about my role is I get to put my investment theses into action. I get the great benefit and responsibility of investing other people's money, people who are trusting me with that. One of the other cool things is that I'm one of 5 people at my firm, and so that's a big difference from going from KPMG, like a multinational firm, and going from BCLC, even a company of about 400 people in the corporate office and more, when you consider our network, to one of 5 being employee number 3. Actually, I always call that employee number 1 because the first 2 people are the individuals who founded. So definitely pretty cool to be on the spectrum of all that and being able to see exactly the results of my efforts.
So even when you were like, because you going back to when you were coming out of school, you thought you'd be in kind of investment and finance that way. You ended up there anyways,
I did.
or got there somehow.
Yeah,
that's really cool. I think that's all the questions we had. Nick, do you have anything else?
Oh, I guess thank you so much for everything. I mean, the inspiration, the knowledge, and I guess I also know where to go if I have questions regarding private equity as well.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So I guess on behalf of both of us, thank you so much for coming on the show. I wish you best of luck with your career path. With I think your son's birthday is coming soon, from what I heard. So early happy birthday to him as well.
Yeah.
I guess thank you so much for everything, and I hope we can have this chat maybe sometime in person soon after this pandemic is over.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you for having me on the podcast. As I said earlier, it's always very flattering to know that people want to hear about what I'm doing, and I can only hope that a little bit of what I said has resonated with your listeners.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks for being on.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay. Have a great rest of the day.
This podcast is a project created by her 18th Pacific Coast Scout Group, where we created awesome leadership and management training program for 18 to 26 years old. If you want to learn more about us, check out our website and social media accounts, link in description.